Okay, everyone, welcome to tonight's space. As you can see, I'm very, very deboosted, so the audience isn't so big. I wanted to wait a few minutes to get a few people in here at least, but hopefully more will show up over time. But this space is going to be more of a archive. So I'm going to have my guest here, Razor Ray McCoy, who will just go as Ray to discuss the other side of the story. Just briefly, I wanted to say that, lately I've been doing a lot of re-examining my beliefs over time. And since I'm a truth seeker, I have no choice but to always do my due diligence, no matter where it leads. And so I'm here tonight to allow Ray to discuss what he's learned about a lot of things in regards to 9/11. For me, I was always a 9/11 truther, if you want to call me that. I've changed my beliefs over time. I started off with the whole loose change, the Twin Towers are blown up, George Bush type of thing. And over the years, I learned that explosives aren't really necessary, right? And ironically, the person I had a conversation with about no explosives was David Duke. So in 2015, I was on Skype with David Duke, who did not buy the explosive stories, and we were going over the Richard Gage points, a meme that he had 10 reasons it was blown up, and he actually went through, no, actually look at this and that. And so David Duke, of all people, he's not an Israeli Mossad agent, was, no, I don't buy the explosive story. So that was a big eye opener for me. And then I came to the point, I said, well, who cares how they did it? The Jews did it. That's it. Doesn't matter if it's explosives or, some people say nuclear bombs in the basement. Other people say direct energy weapons, Judy Wood. There's a trillion conspiracies about how the Twin Towers were demolished or fell apart or whatever the case. But the smoking gun for me, in my personal experience, was the dancing Israelis, right? Because if these Israelis were there before the attacks, then that's foreknowledge. But what I learned just a few weeks ago, actually, was I ran into Razor Ray having a debate with no other than Ryan Dawson on the stream. And I was shocked how Dawson could not really defend his position. And, Dawson is known in these circles as somebody who's just an expert on this topic. No one really questions it. And so you just, what Dawson says is the truth. But I saw somebody who I'm not friends with anymore at all completely lose. And I was shocked. And then I read this Substack from Ray's friend. I think he goes by Whitmayer, that was extremely detailed and long and sourced to find out there was a lot of discrepancies in the narrative that I believed about the dancing Israelis. So tonight's space is not about saying there is zero Mossad involvement. There's no way to really prove that. It's not to say that Jews or Saudi. I'm not here to debunk a big picture narrative. We are going to tackle specific claims made by specific people and see if they actually correspond with reality itself. What are the facts? So that's what this space is. Also, don't believe me or Ray. Fact check. One of the things I learned over the years is that you might like somebody, you might like me or someone else, and they say something and you go, well, he's always honest, so it must be true. But you know what? Every one of us is fallible. And we might trust somebody who has the wrong information, whether they were duped or they're lying or some other reason. So we have to always fact check everything, including our own beliefs. And you have nothing to lose but falsehoods. So if you're wrong, then you learn the truth. If you're right, you learn that your position is true. So you can't lose. But a lot of people that I've learned over the years, a lot of these people are not honest. A lot of them are actually grifting. A lot of them know that they're lying about things, and it brings the clicks. It gets them clout. It's controversial. It's everything that allows them to push narratives that are simply completely false. And once I saw the Charlie Kirk narrative literally be built in front of my eyes from people I thought I respected who were allies, completely lying, I said, oh my God, what else is false that I've learned from these very people? So the Charlie Kirk assassination, which everyone here is seeing this ridiculous narrative being promoted with no basis whatsoever in reality, defying physics. Well, That's just one conspiracy theory we've witnessed being created in front of us. What others? Makes you wonder. So, without further ado, I want Ray to introduce yourself. Go ahead. The floor is yours. Why don't you tell the audience who you are and why you're here? Go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks. Before I get to who I am and how I got to the topic,
Okay.
I do want to
Volume-
thank
can
you.
you-
Excuse me. Did you trying to talk?
Yeah, yeah. I want to. Can you up
Oh,
your volume a little bit?
let me see. Is that any better?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Uh,
So,
Okay.
sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure it was good.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
So so I appreciate getting the opportunity to do this, and especially from you. I know we discussed doing it a while back, and I had stuff on my schedule, and you also had a lot of stuff you were dealing with, and you still are. And I think this doesn't really necessarily um, help with things like getting your accounts back and other issues that are going on, because this actually is a topic that people don't really want to talk about traditionally. I've had a very difficult time getting adversaries to talk about it, so people who believe in it, apart from Ryan Dawson. A while when we did that one debate, and actually we were supposed to continue it, but it didn't happen. And I have some arguments that I was going to bring up that I didn't get to use, and I saved up for a continuation that didn't happen. But other proponents of it, they also are not really keen on really defending the substance of the claims about the dancing Israelis or the art students or some of the other. Maybe you've heard of the Odigo theory, and
Yeah,
then
that
there's
every Jew got a message, so nobody died, which
mhm,
is completely false. Yeah.
correct.
Around
So
400 around 400 Jews died that day. Not only that, Howard Lutnick's brother died, and Pete Davidson's father, he's a Jewish comedian. His father was a firefighter. He also died. So I guess these Jews didn't get the call that day, and yeah, so it's just a silly conspiracy theory. But go ahead.
so there's a lot of people who believe in it, but they rely on outdated media reports. They rely on misreadings of the FBI case file that was FOIA'd, I think, in 2012, actually by an anti-Israel activist. And they also rely a lot on the work of Ryan Dawson and other people like Whitney Webb that have been basically recycling the same materials for over and for just for at this point it's a clean quarter century. Um, the new information just is not there. Why? Because there wasn't really a foundation to this to begin with, and the reason is that after a major disaster like 9/11, when you have people who are behaving erratically, of course you're going to get people that get arrested and people act suspiciously, and it's not going to be a position of mine tonight or any other time that I don't think that they should have been arrested, or I don't think that they were suspicious. I think that the witness that reported them did whatever, what I would have done in such a situation. But the fact is that if you look through the case file against them, well, it would have been the case against them that the FBI would have had to present both to the Department of Justice, and then presumably if they would have been indicted by a grand jury, to their lawyers, that they didn't really have much apart from obviously some people that behaved inappropriately and suspiciously. But what beyond that? Was there criminal activity? Well, these were people who were all working on tourist visas or expired tourist visas. A couple of them had travel documents. Um, and certainly, I think there were two that were ID'd, uh, to some degree having a connection to Israeli military intelligence. So why am I calling it Israeli military intelligence and not the Mossad? It's because the Mossad is not Israeli military intelligence. It's Israel's foreign espionage and intelligence service. The Israeli military intelligence service is called Aman, which stands for Agaf Modi'in, which is the intelligence branch. So, you know, I know you want me to introduce my own background. So I am an Israeli American. Both of my parents were born there. I was born here, um, and they moved here in the 80s. And actually, so well, I think they both ended up moving to where I live now in the 80s. But I think my mom moved here earlier. Um, and then, uh, when I got out of high school, I did do my obligatory national military service in Israel as an Israeli American. So I am one of these dual citizens that a lot of your listeners probably are predisposed not to like or disbelieve. But everything that I'm telling you today can be looked up online. You can scrutinize my work soon. I'm planning to publish a book sometime later this year. You can also try to scrutinize the sources of people like Whitney Webb and Ryan Dawson. In fact, I think Whitney Webb cited Ryan Dawson in her article with Mint Press News from 2015, which is how I found this topic. Um, she published this article called "Newly Released FBI." For well, 1 second, it's reloading here. FBI docs shed light on apparent Mossad foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks. That's when the photos, not the FBI file itself, but the photos, which are ridiculously, they look like they've been photocopied like a million times because they probably were. They were released of the 5 suspects, the dancing Israelis, whose names are Sivan Kurtzberg, Paul Kurtzberg, Oded Elner, Yaron Shmuel, and Omer Marmari. So those names are all public, and uh, they were known, I believe, before that. And in 2018, their photos were released, and so people were speculating at the time, oh, did they have foreknowledge? Because some of them have a timestamp for 9/10 2001 2001, not for 9/11.
Yeah, the
Now,
picture you mean, right? Because that's what I saw when I saw
yes.
the yeah, when I saw the file. First of all, everyone saw the the dancing Israeli file. You
Hmm.
can't even see what's behind them, so you don't know
Right.
what if the tower's hit or not. You just see white, and you see these guys in overalls, and they're pointing, and they have a lighter, and it's horrible behavior. And it says September 10. I'm like, well, there you go, smoking gun, right?
Hmm.
So how does one explain that if that's you have a file that says September 10th and it's before the attacks, if it were September 10th, but it's not September 10th, right? What's how does that work out?
Okay, so there was in the FBI file that actually is explained, which is there was a police inspection. So the FBI um, sent uh, a police inspector from New Jersey to search the van, and they were supposed to find a camcorder because on one of the suspects was recovered a still frame film camera, and the witness had reported camcorder. So he did not find a camcorder, but when he inspected the actual camera, he found out that it was about 14 hours slow. So the timestamp clock that's on it. So basically, it was an instrument error, if you want to call it that, because back then, film camera, obviously it's not connected to the web like your phone camera would be. It's not. So you have to basically sync the time with the time on whatever clock you're using as your reference. So that was the reason that it was showing. Let me see here. It says like 9 10 01, and So the time of day I think was in the evening, but clearly it's daytime in the photo. So
Right. So the actual timing of the photograph is off anyway. So
yeah,
that would
it says
explain.
actually. So in her article it says September 10th, 2001 at around 3 p.m.
Mhm.
But they did analysis, and it is reported within the FBI document. Not only was the analysis capable of first of all, that was never claimed in the FBI document, but it also was the crucial evidence that pointed towards them being there after Flight 11, American Airlines Flight 11, had crashed into the North Tower, because they saw a helicopter in the photo. They identified the helicopter as belonging to the local CBS affiliate. And so then they went to the news station and they looked at their footage to correlate where the position of the helicopter was around the time that this photo would have been taken, and it would have been in the field of view of that photo. And so they found that it was around 9 a.m. So that was the first plane collided. Flight 11 collided with the North Tower at exactly 8:46 a.m. on 9/11. So it was more than 15 minutes after the first plane had hit.
Yeah, because people say that they were there before anything happened, and that would absolutely be foreknowledge. But you're saying that that's not the case, right?
Well, even if they had, it is not the case based on the test, but based on the accounts of people that were interviewed by the FBI, meaning coworkers and other people that were present in the area at the time. So there were gas station attendees that had seen them, and they themselves had shown up to work earlier that morning at their warehouse in Weehawken, which isn't that far. It's not as if I'm not from Jersey. I know that you're from that part of the country, but um, basically, these two cities, Union City, which is where they were seen, and Weehawken are only like a few blocks away. So it's not as if they had to travel far to get where they wanted to see the towers after they'd heard about the towers being hit. But um, let's say that they had been in the area right before the tower was hit, and then they start getting on the roof of this, and they hear that the tower was hit, and they get on the roof and they start taking photos. Is that conclusive proof that they had foreknowledge? It's not conclusive proof, because every person in the area who had a line of sight to look at the towers, if they didn't weren't in front of a TV, was looking at the World Trade Center. And um, there were also other sightings, according to the FBI file, of other either the same people or other people from that company, Urban Moving Systems, at Liberty State Park later in the day. Why would they go to Liberty State Park if they had a great vantage point from the Doric Towers apartments, which is where they were seen? It's because the view was not amazing from there. I mean, you could see the towers, but the best view, or the most direct view across the Hudson River to see the towers, it is from Liberty State Park, a little bit further south from where they were. So there were people in the FBI file that reported seeing a van from Urban Moving Systems at Liberty State Park. But what would that mean? It could mean either they went down there, the same people, to look at the towers. It could mean that there was another group of movers who went down there to look at the towers. And it could mean that they were trying to cross over on the ferry to get back to their home or wherever were staying in Brooklyn, because the day was over and they were sent home. So all of those things, if you take together all the context, which is really why a lot of people are unable to grasp that this is not that good of a case. If you look at all the context of their actions and all of uh, the other evidence, if you want to call it evidence in the file, it's pretty clear that if there was an intelligence operation going on, it would have been the most amateur thing ever. Having a clearly marked um, van, and all the people would be identifiable by riding in it, and you had different teams of people in the same van, in the same marked van. So there was another group. I'm sure you probably have come across this story, which I didn't mention at the beginning. In Pennsylvania, there was another. It wasn't a group. It was two guys who were long range move guys. They went to move a client from the Columbus area, so they drove from Weehawken to Worthington, Ohio, which is south of Columbus, and they were seen in Pennsylvania on September 10th in an urban moving systems van, and they were actually stopped by the Pennsylvania State Police for speeding. Um, and then they were stopped on the way back on 9/12 because they were in an urban moving systems van. Now, where had they been? They basically driven to do a move job from Columbus to Chicago. I don't know why clients would be ordering a moving service from New Jersey to. I mean, maybe the bid was good, and there's this whole thing about the Israeli moving companies being huge scammers. And Whitmer wrote a lot about it in his article, which actually you should probably share the article on
Yeah, I
your
could put it
Twitter.
on the
I have
Nest. I
I
need the
have before.
article
Yeah.
again because my computer actually died 2 days ago. I'm using my other computer, so I don't have any of it.
Okay. Yeah. I'll send it to you. So
And
this
you could
this
actually
is
add it to the Nest too if you wanted to. Actually, yeah, if that's doesn't have to be a tweet though, right? I could put it underneath this space, I believe.
oh, you can't. Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
So basically, this move was what they went from New Jersey to Columbus to Chicago. Now, why is it remarkable? It's because they were pulled over and given a speeding, actually like an illegal turn ticket, a moving violation in New Stanton, Pennsylvania. And for people like Ryan Dawson, that's useful because he claimed that that's 2 miles from the site of the United 93 crash. It's actually not. I think it's closer to 50 miles away. And the reason that they want this to be significant, I mean, you have to think about the logic behind it, okay? Is because they were claiming at one point, he was claiming at one point that the passport for 9/11 hijacking pilot Ziad Jarrah, who was the pilot of United 93, that was planted by them the day before 9/11. Okay, and that's even in his documentary. Um, what was it? Not There's War by Deception, and what's the other one he has? It's like 6 hours long.
Is it Empire
Um,
Unmasked, I believe?
Empire
Yeah,
Unmasked. Yeah,
yeah.
it's in Empire Unmasked. So his proposal was that they had stopped on in the area of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where United 93 hadn't gone down yet. They take this semi-burned passport, I'm assuming, and they plant it in the field where the wreckage would be, and that would be what they were actually doing. Um, and why they were stuck, and then they turned onto the highway and they did like a wide turn, and then the cops pulled them over, and there you go. But it's they were pulled over in New Stanton, Pennsylvania. You can actually look at a map and measure the distance between Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and New Stanton. It's actually a rest area in New Stanton, Pennsylvania. um, so that theory rests entirely upon believing that they were there for the purpose of planting a passport. Now, that is just blatant speculation. I mean, so you put a piece of burnt paper outside, and you're assuming that within a day it's not going to blow away in the wind or something, like get so far away. And this is assuming that they had the not only the foreknowledge but the foresight to know exactly where United 93 would have crash landed. Okay. Um, so so with Ryan Dawson, I know that you've had you've had like some personal interactions with him, and I obviously had the debate, and I don't want this to be just some personal assault on his character. But for a while, he was entertaining theories like this because there was this urge among people who are subscribers to it to shoehorn any type of new um, logic into any of these pieces of evidence that might be out there, right? So the idea that these people were stopped in Pennsylvania. Well, what's the connection between that and the 9/11 attacks? Oh, there was a plane that went down in Pennsylvania. So they were arrested on the way back. This is how they got into the file. Because they were in an urban moving systems van, they were arrested on the way back from Chicago after the attacks on 9/12, and they were held for I don't think they were held as long as the dancing Israelis themselves, but there is no evidence to support that they planted the passport. It's entirely speculation, but those are the types of things that are put out there in order to make this claim that urban moving systems was this massive Mossad operation. um, there's another company, Classic International Movers, that did indeed move a 9/11 hijacker, Abdulaziz Al Omari, from I think they moved him from Florida to New Jersey, right? Or actually, no, I think they did the opposite. They moved him from Jersey to Florida, and so uh, Dawson at one point was making the claim that this was evidence that Yaron Shmuel, one of the dancing Israelis, had been involved in surveilling the hijackers. Well, the fact is that Yaron Shmuel started out in Florida, and then he moved to New York area, so he was going in the opposite direction. Um, so a lot of this really rests on, if we're talking about the dancing Israelis, and hopefully we'll have some time to get to the art students, which is a different angle on this. um, it rests on people being ignorant of the details. So they rely on a person who claims to have deeper insight into it, like Ryan Dawson, and like Christopher Bolin in the past, and Michael Collins Piper. And they don't actually get to know the details, and that's the way most people process news anyway. So I'm not only beating up on people who are believers here. I'm a free thought supporter. I'm a lowercase L libertarian. I think people should be free to express these things. I don't think that the censorship that has been placed on people in the past really helped, because of course it festered, and now that a lot of the censorship has dissipated, it's completely sprung out into the open, and it's been recycled. Obviously, since October 7th, it's taken on a new life of its own, because it coincides with other theories about false flags regarding October 7th itself. So I've been dedicated for the past 2 years to specifically looking at this, because it's an area of interest of my own. I know, as a millennial and someone who served in Iraq in the Marines, it's an important topic for you, because it tainted the reason for your service, if I understood your previous videos correctly.
Yeah.
And so that's why a lot of people, I think, in our generation, the millennial generation, it resonates, and I remember it too. And
Well, I mean, it
the whole
changed my
thing of,
life, right? I mean, that's
yeah.
what after 9/11, I was 17 years old and I sought the recruiter. And he's like, "You can't join right now. You're 17." I said, "I want to join and fight for my country. Hook, line, and sinker. We're going to Iraq. That's it. I didn't know why we were going. I didn't even know what the Marine Corps was like. I didn't watch Full Metal Jacket. I had no idea what I was getting into. I was like, I want to go on the top, most aggressive. I want to go fight. And I joined the late entry program at 17, and then 18, 4 days after high school, I went right to boot camp. So I didn't even enjoy my last summer. But this absolutely changed my life. I don't know if you saw my interview with Jeremy Boring. I gave him my whole spiel of why I got into everything I got into. Once I believed 9/11 was an inside job from George Bush or whatever, then I go down the rabbit holes and I learn about the Jews and they did it. And then it just went from there. That's how I got into the anti-Semitism from that gateway, right? Because if the Jews did 9/11 or whatever, then oh my God, they're not our greatest ally; they're our greatest enemy, and all this other stuff, USS Liberty, Pollard, et cetera, et cetera. So this to me is something that I have to look into because it changed my life. And you would think someone like me would be like closing my ears right now and not wanting to listen at all because that defends my identity as a Marine and I fought for my country. Quite the opposite. Well, once I learned or believed that it was an inside job, I had to let go of it and like, oh, my service was for nothing. So it was very traumatic for me. People don't understand that. So for me to even listen to the other side, which I would say you are the other side, from when I was, it was never even an option, Ray. I would never listen to a Jewish person about anything. Once I became anti-Semitic, I would never listen at all. So that's why I wanted to have this space so other people can listen to the other side of the story because they probably never heard it before. Because once they make an assumption that Jews are a monolith and they're all hiding everything, then anything a Jew says or any person says, even if they weren't Jewish, like you saying the same thing, you're shilling for Israel, you're covering it up, you're doing X, Y, Z, right? So yeah, this was a massive thing for my life. It changed everything. And I am a true truth seeker. I don't care where it leads. If I do more research and it leads to Israel or some other country, it is what it is, or my own government or nobody. But yeah, so going back to the dancing is because we talked about the moving systems in Pennsylvania and things like this. So my thing was they were there before the attacks, then they recorded it, but none of that's true. And you went further to explain how there's other teams that were caught because they were just involved with urban moving systems, and that was going to be the assumption is they planted the ID, and that's this
Mhm.
whole thing. So Dominic Suter is the owner of Urban Moving Systems, right? And but he fled that next day, correct? So the argument is, well, the guy he fled, look, he's gone. So why would this guy flee after 9/11? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah. So the simplest explanation, and it's not going to satisfy. In fact, it didn't satisfy me, but it does make sense legally and logically. Is that the FBI obviously, when they arrested his employees, they wanted to look into who they were working for, and this is a business that was habitually employing illegal foreign labor, people that were here either entirely illegally or maybe they were on a tourist visa, like some of these people were. Some of them were on expired tourist visas. Um, so he would have been facing, the consequences of it. And I think that one of the things that was one of the takeaways we should have actually acted on during 9/11 was actual border security, knowing at least who's coming in and whether they're staying here and working jobs like this, because there were, and I go through this in the upcoming book, Lucas. There were a lot of near misses before 9/11. People think about the LAX Millennium Bomb that almost happened in 1999. There was an Algerian national named Ahmed Rassam who came in through Port. He was trying to come in through Port Angeles, Washington, and he was arrested because of basically an alert customs officer, a female officer, and she identified his nervous behavior simply by body language, and then searched the vehicle, and they found a significant explosive device in it. And excuse me. So he was coming in through Washington State from Canada, and that was blind luck. There was an even closer call, and it's covered in a book by a guy named Samuel Katz. Um, and I'll get you the title later. I don't have it on me,
Well,
but
I do want to
it's
focus on
uh,
9/11 because
yeah. Then the dance.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so on Dominic Suter. So Dominic Suter was like a lot of the employers in the New York, New Jersey area who have these labor intensive operations. He was, and even to this day, he was operating with illegal labor. So the reason he would have fled the country, and also I believe his wife was a dual national, was probably to avoid the legal consequences that would have befell him and his business. Now, if people want to speculate whether, there's allegations I've heard that he's like Chinese Israeli, there's all sorts of things. That's great. um Speculate all you want, but there is no hard evidence that he was doing anything that was beyond that. Now, there were suspicious things. There was the fact that there were all these computers at Urban Moving Systems warehouse that were interesting, but they were all seized. So without knowing what the FBI found in those computers, and they could have been, who knows, they could have been just records, like in the FBI file, there's an Annex 2, which has a lot of stuff about the insurance that the company held and different licenses that they held in New York and New Jersey. Those, it could have been stuff that was totally benign. It could have been stuff that was coded. It could have been anything. But the emphasis on the could have been, nobody knows. And um, this is a frustration that I have in common with people who are believers in the theory. It's that there are copious redactions in the FBI file, and let's be honest. Just like with the Epstein files, um, the more that gets out there, the better for the purposes of people like you or I, or the people in the chat, in the, not the chat, but in the space, that believe it or disbelieve it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If we're talking about contentious issues, we would be able to inspect it, but we don't have it. And there is no evidence that Dominic Suter was doing anything illegal besides employing illegal labor. And there were even interviews with his employees, who were from the former Soviet Union, Republic of Georgia, and I think maybe it was Ukraine, and they were saying, yeah, everybody here is an illegal alien. So, there, he probably feared the consequences, and there's no better answer I can give you without having more information that might have been in the possession of the FBI.
Okay, so Dominic Suter was running a shady moving company. These dancing Israelis were former IDF, or some of them were in military intelligence, not the IDF. How do you know that they're in military intelligence? Like, how do you? Is there a document that shows? We know that they went on an Israeli television, and when asked, they said, "What were you there for?" And they said, "We were there to document the event." Now that's pretty strange, but what if they said we were there to take pictures? Or I don't know if the translation is perfect from Hebrew to English, right? I mean, if you ask anyone, what are you doing? And they're taking a photograph of the towers, they're just taking a picture of the towers. In fact, there are other couples. There are some couples that took pictures of the towers, like literally in front of them, like smiling. It was really weird. And they were just Americans. But, so we have them on Israeli television saying we were there to document event. People take that and
Right.
say, oh, that's foreknowledge. But they had connections, at least two of them. Which ones have the connections? How do you know they have the connections? And we'll start with that. Go ahead.
Okay, so I don't have the names of the ones that had connections readily with me, but as far as the interview on the uh, what was his name, Yair Lapid show. So when they say our purpose was to document the event, so that's a phrase in Hebrew, that the word to document could just as easily mean to witness. Okay, so the word is lita'ed. The problem with the recording, the one that's been on, I'm assuming the one that you saw was from Corbett Report, but it could be, there's other people that have shared it. I've never seen a copy that's not dubbed, and I've actually requested from family overseas and people I know from when I lived there, are they able to reach out to the broadcast authority and get like an original copy? So, that's something that would probably help to shed light on whether the translation was accurate. What I did find was that there was, and I'll send this to you later. Um, it's an article from a different media outlet over there called Makori Shon. Makori Shon in Hebrew means first source. It's a local newspaper from Israel, and they were asked pretty much the same question, and their answer was, our purpose was to document it just like everyone else that was there, right? So anybody who was in New York, New Jersey, presumably, like if they're from Connecticut, maybe they drove down. If they're, you know, into like seeing things for themselves, it's a once in a lifetime disaster. And there were many people who were taking photos, taking video. Some people taking photos of themselves against the backdrop of the World Trade Center up in flames, or even once it had fallen. Um, so the answer that they gave was consistent with what they were doing, which was to go there and uh, bear witness to this. And they probably were thinking, why is everybody so up in arms about us simply doing what tourists do, right?
Well, I
So
think the word
yeah,
purpose sounds
yeah,
like you see the word purpose, like, well, what do you
mhm,
mean your purpose was to do that, right? If they were just like,
yeah.
look, we're up there taking photos like anyone else. So the question is, did purpose was that translated correctly, or did they actually say purpose because there's no other word in English for it? Like that's the weird part. Like, what do you mean your
Yeah.
purpose was to do that? Like, were you hired to do that? Were you assigned to do that? That was your purpose? Like, right? That could be a translation issue from English to Hebrew. But that was what's weird, right? Our
Mhm.
purpose was to document the event. And that's like, okay, why is your purpose to do that again? See?
So that's why I say that if you look at the press article that they were asked the same question, it's not, our purpose was to document the event, period. It's our purpose was to, in the other interview they say, well, our purpose was to document the event just like the other people around there.
Right.
um so that's what I think is remarkable, which is that once people get into the mindset that there was nefarious intent, and it could be construed from the way they express themselves. Certainly, like, let me push back against your line of reasoning in a different way. If you had a group of people, as the Israeli government, who had been dispatched overseas to go on this surveillance mission, and they'd been caught, and it became this incident that was in the press, and even certain well-known individuals like Dershowitz got involved. Um, would you? And these people did work for you, okay? This wasn't just some sort of misunderstanding. Would you want this to come out into the light and everybody to know the truth, or would you try to hush it up?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I would tell everyone to just be honest about it.
Yeah, but you're saying that if you were let's say you were the United States and you had these
Oh,
people.
you mean the Israeli government? Yeah,
Yes,
of
if you're the
course. Of
Israeli government.
course. Yeah,
So
yeah.
the Israeli government, their interest, and so Yair Lapid's show was on Israel's national broadcast network, Channel 1. Um, and of course, later he became the prime minister. That's one of the reasons people now find it even more interesting. But the interest in it came before he was prime minister and before he was in politics, and he was pretty much, I would say, he's kind of like the Larry King of Israeli TV, but much younger and more, more put together, right? So he was the top interviewer for many years, and so they basically allowed these super spies, if you will, to go on the most viewed talk platform in the country back then. And they weren't afraid that they would slip up and let loose with some. And the biggest quote from it is, our purpose was to document the event. In my opinion, the fact that they were allowed on TV is
Right. You would
demonstrating that
right.
it's probably not true that they were spies. And there are people that I know who have accepted that they were not involved in 9/11, but they probably were um, intelligence agents, and they were simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's things like this. Okay, let me just go on a little bit of a line of thought here. It's things like this: the fact that they were allowed on TV by the Israeli government onto the state-owned network. It's not like they control the editorial line of the network necessarily, but certainly there is some level of censorship of the press in Israel for sensitive matters. If you know the Vanunu affair, maybe you've read about it. There was some censorship regarding that. Um, so they allowed that to happen. The fact that in the FBI file, there's drug paraphernalia that they were caught using in the photographs. The fact that there were personal notebooks of theirs with or phone books, so that back then people didn't really carry around cell phones, so they kept the numbers in notebooks, and so they're arrested by the FBI. The FBI can simply contact their sister, their cousins, the people that they went to the military with. They could contact all sorts of people, and their phone number is right there. Um, there was a copy of The Hobbit in Hebrew, right? So all of these things are, if you're a person who is a covert intelligence asset overseas, even in a friendly country, I don't think that that would be, the type of trade craft that they would let you get away with. Okay. Um, and I get, I'm speaking as a layperson. Okay. I know some people are going to hop on here and question who I am and whether, there's some nefarious association that I have. No, I'm not affiliated with anyone. And, but I can tell you that if you just think it through really quickly, if you had a person involved in intelligence, would you want them with all these indicators as to what country you're from and who your personal affiliations with, or your family, your friends, and all those things, the way that they behaved under interrogation, not consistent with anything that I've ever heard about an intelligence operative anywhere. So some would say, "Oh, okay, so people employ reverse psychology. This is exactly what they would do, not to appear like intelligence agents, to be so incompetent that it would be incomprehensible." Well, I've heard all sorts of arguments about why you know they were using a bong made out of like a Nesquik bottle. They went to some rave somewhere. um so there's all of this stuff that gets associated with them through the file that nobody really wants to address because they're laser focused on Dominic Suter, and we were there to document the event. And when you look at it holistically, I get it that there I've said at the beginning of this conversation today, Lucas, that they were suspicious people, but being suspicious is not the crime. You have to have actual evidence behind the suspicion.
But what
The
about
fact
the cash, the box cutters? I mean, we would expect box cutters in a moving company, right? But what about the cash, the passports? One had a flight on September 12th, I believe, and then of course the bomb residue that people claim was apparently because the dog went off, the dog was barking.
Mhm.
So I think Dawson's narrative is that these guys planted bombs with these trucks, and then they escaped and watched their job, unfold, right? So, what about all these other things that I just mentioned in regards to these? Because they were they did have cameras, they did have box cutters, cash, passports. You just mentioned the Hobbit and
Yeah.
some pictures of their. I guess there were potheads for some reason.
Mhm.
So if you want to explain that to the audience, because those are the things that people remember. They don't know anything about the Hobbit. They know box cutters, bomb residue, and the pictures. That's all they got,
Okay,
right?
so let me address the issue of the bomb residue first. Okay, so if you have if you have your vehicle inspected by dogs, and they detect something suspicious, whether it's so there's sniffing dogs, there's bomb sniffing dogs. So that's an indicator, and they can search your car or your vehicle or your premises. Um, I'm assuming that you need a warrant in order to search someone's house, but there is a such thing as a false positive. Now, why am I bringing it up? Because when it came to a different issue that Ryan Dawson happens to find as one of his pet narratives with the anthrax. There was a scientist named Stephen Hatfill, who was suspected for a long time of being behind the anthrax letters. Some people might not remember this, but in the months after September 11th, there was an anthrax scare. There were all these letters that were being received, and it is definitely suspicious. And Stephen Hatfill was one of the scientists who was suspected. And so three dogs identified I think it was his apartment as being as having traces of anthrax. And so Ryan Dawson's entire narrative rests on that this was false, and that he was framed basically. And it did turn out that there was no other evidence, I believe, that implicated Stephen Hatfill. But that goes to show that, yeah, that it's suspicious. It's part of the suspicious activity. It's not a smoking gun. It's not the conclusive evidence of possession of explosives, because possession implies that you actually find the actual article. Again, they never found explosives on them, and in fact, there were a lot of false reports of explosive vans, not only in the New York area around the George Washington Bridge, but also in Washington D.C. And there's never emerged actual hard evidence that there was an explosive van over there. And there have been, you know, reported sightings over the years, and there's the famous photoshopped van that had the plane flying into the tower that
Yeah,
people
that's totally
share and
right.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's I get it, and yeah, that is in the FBI file, and yet they didn't find explosives, and also um, you know
Well, didn't
getting
the file say that they tested it and it was inconclusive? That doesn't mean it's not right. I mean, let's
right.
so
and, and,
inconclusive.
and yeah, inconclusive means just what it means. It means that you can't point to it being a positive identification or negative. So really, unless they were to find a different van that was full of explosives, or some sort of more direct evidence like video of them dropping off the whatever it was into the World Trade Center, let's say, like where do you go with it? And that's the big question I always try to um you know work into the conversation about this. It's that you have a lot of suspicious activity from these suspects, but where do you go with it in order to say, yeah, these guys were involved in X, right? Was it in uh, controlled demolition of the World Trade Center? Was it with simply monitoring what was going on? Because that wasn't the best place to monitor where it was going on, and using a still film photograph. I know you mentioned the camera. Using a still camera, using film. There's a lot there. Actually, I want to talk about film in a minute, because that's where I'm getting to something that I never revealed in my debate with Ryan Dawson, but that's not exactly the best type of technology that was available at the time. Even there were digital cameras back in 2001. You would expect perhaps um, that people who were involved in one of the more innovative intelligence agencies in the world would have something better than a standard Canon EOS camera. So yeah, everything we've both mentioned is an indicator of suspicious activity, but it's not indicative of an actual espionage operation.
Yeah. So okay. So there, I guess we could just say a bunch of former IDF. Some of them are military intelligence, not Mossad, and they were doing this weird scammy job. And then, so how do you tell someone that they were not at the location before the because that's the thing. Like they say, no, 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 they were there before. And there's a van. I remember in one of the clips, he said there was a van there, or a picture that there's their van right there. Was that not their van, or is that another van?
Well, there were multiple witnesses. One witness reported that there was a van with an electrical contractor sign that was there much earlier, and people gave like very vague time time indicators. Like one of them said 8 a.m. And that I think was with regards to the electrical contractor van. But they have receipts from when they went through the Holland Tunnel. Um, and I don't think that based on that they would have been able to get there at 8 o'clock. And even if they could, let's say that they get there at 8 o'clock. Again, so the thing I want to emphasize. So if you look at, you can go on Google Earth. This is what I did back in 2019 when I first looked at this. You can go on Google Earth. You can type in the address of the Doric Tower Apartments. You can type in the address of Urban Moving Systems. I think both of those are in the FBI report, and you can actually face towards Lower Manhattan, and you can see, would that be a view that would be a good way to look at what's going on near what's now West Trade Center 1, World Trade Center 1. And I think the answer would be, yeah, you could see it. Is it the best place you could view it? Probably not. And really, what and beyond that, okay, what intelligence value would you derive from it? And that's something I see people are replying to the thread. What actual intelligence value would come of it? And that's a question nobody has ever been able to answer. If you're standing across the Hudson River and this whole thing is unfolding on TV and you have a still frame camera, what special value are you getting out of having five people on the ground with one camera documenting the event?
Right. And so, and you were talking about the technology itself not being sufficient, or what you wanted to make a statement about the camera, right?
Yeah. Not long after the photos were released under a FOIA, so Ryan Dawson went on a stream with Adam Green. And they discussed the photographic evidence. And so um, in one of the statements that Ryan made was that um, so when they were being arrested, so the discrepancy in terms of, I think it was in terms of the timestamp. He said that the guy who was handling the camera started to reverse the film spool and try to snap new photos in order to cover it up. Now, the reason that this is not really plausible, so I went and looked at the product literature from that camera. So you don't have the ability to manually reverse the spool. That's A. And B, if you remember, did you ever use I mean, I'm sure you did at one point use like at least like one of those point and shoot cameras, like the old
Yeah, the
Polaroid
old ones that
ones.
you click. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Disposable. Yeah.
But if you even use, so I did take photography in high school, film photography. So every time you open the shutter, um you're not just letting light in, you're letting in a new image. Okay, so let's say they were able to reverse the spool, so they would be imposing on an image that's already there a new exposure. And so you would see one setting on top of a different one. You would see the setting, let's say, of the Twin Towers smoking, and on top of that, you would see his lap, the lap of the operator, or something like that, or the interior of the van, let's say. So there would be some sort of, basically there would be the original image, and there would be the artifact, which would be the stuff that is superimposed on top of that. Because film photography, after all, is light exposure. So um basically Ryan Dawson was, I think that this is one of these areas. He talks about kooks with regards to the Charlie Kirk assassination. So what he was doing was speaking off the cuff about the topic, photography, where he wanted to explain the discrepancy in the timestamp, or something else relating to the photos. And he simply went off the beaten path, and it doesn't make any logical sense if you know anything about photography. It's technically impossible what he said. So I was supposed to confront him about that back in the day, and I don't know if he would have had an explanation about it, or if he would have said, basically, um, there are ways to do it. I'm not sure, but that was one of the things that I'm a technical person. I do work in a STEM field, so those are the types of things that interest me too. Obviously there's issues that are involved in this that interest me in terms of my political views and things like that. But the nuts and bolts of what happened on 9/11 are important to making the case. Um, and that's one of the things that people like Ryan Dawson and before him, um, Michael Collins Piper were throwing out. They were saying, and there's different videos of both of them saying it. Ryan says that I can't really explain to you how, but I can certainly tell you who did 9/11. So I may be paraphrasing it, but basically saying that how is not really the matter. The matter is who did it and who benefits from it. And Piper also would say similar things. And the reason Piper would say it, to be clear, I don't think is because he was necessarily disinterested in the real mechanics of what happened, but because um, during the 2000s, when there was loose change and there were all these other very speculative theories about directed energy weapons and things like that. So these became so outrageous and so implausible that there were people who said, screw it, we're not going to talk about how this happened anymore, because it's really distracting from getting the culprit, right? As if they're really getting Israel when they point the finger, right? So to speak to the audience, to speak to people that you're trying to convince of a case, there are a lot of people who are more convinced when you talk to motive than if you talk to the evidence. So
Yeah, they
that's
say the
one of the.
circumstantial evidence is so overwhelming. You're a shill if you don't instantly believe. And for me, I'm not convinced by just circumstantial. I need to know like empirical evidence. I need to know things that add up coherently, right? And the only thing we can really do, as I said earlier before, is that we can only just see a narrative and see if it makes sense. And if it doesn't add up with other claims, then it's probably false. But yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, many things have been claimed about the situation, and a lot of the things aren't true. Like you said, I just got to the point where, okay, well, I don't know how they pulled it off either, but I know Israel did it. Like that's me too. I said, well, when I talked to David Duke, well, maybe they didn't blow it up with bombs, but they certainly did it, right? That's the conclusion everyone got, especially when you're overwhelmed with lasers from space and nuclear weapons and thermite and every other conspiracy about 9/11. Um, but all right, so because I want to focus on the dancing Israeli as the most important thing, because that was the smoking gun in my view, right? If they had foreknowledge, so you've demonstrated that they're probably not who we think we are. They are, right? They're doing smoking weed or something. Uh, the it's inconclusive, the explosive, so that's another claim that's out the window. And they had the Hobbit, like you said earlier. So what about September 12th? I know one of them had a flight to get out of the country, right? Um, Now,
Yeah.
what do you say to that? Okay, so
So
that's an
the
escape route.
yeah, the explanation that was given was that so one of the person who held that he was done with his job with urban moving systems. So these people were itinerant travelers. Okay, so they go and they work it as a gig to finance their travels abroad. If you're after the so in Israel, let me explain this for people who they want to get a flavor for the cultural context here. So when I did my military service, I got out. I didn't really have an interest in traveling the world, but a lot of Israelis do, and that factors into a lot of interesting conspiracy theories like Plan Andina in Argentina. Um, and they're also usually not very well. well off. So they'll work jobs, and there are some jobs in Israel that pay a little better, or that you can get a grant from. But a lot of people, they go abroad because you can get paid at the time. Getting paid in dollars, is was really good for people who, foreign workers, especially if you're taking those dollars and spending them as a tourist in a place like Australia, which was where one of the dancing Israelis was requesting a tourist visa, or in India. Um, so the one who had travel documents for the 12th had already finished working for Urban Moving Systems. It was basically his last day. And one of the other ones was the guy who had joined in order to basically replace him. And then there was another guy who had travel documents for, I believe, the following March. And, logically speaking, if you were to be in on some plot that would have involved planes attacking the World Trade Center on 9/11, and you had travel documents on the 12th, I don't think you could rely on that being a safe escape route.
Right, because they grounded the planes that very day, right? Unless you had
Yeah.
some secret connection to an airport, which obviously they didn't. Um, okay, so just taking everything into account, you're saying they were not there at the time of the attacks, only after. They documented the event, meaning they were just there to take pictures, like many people that day. I mean, there are people recording the towers. I mean, are they in on it too? Like people on the street right underneath the buildings, were they placed there by the Mossad? There's so many other things. Like once you see the Jew angle, you're not looking at everyone else that day who was just on the street, talking, doing a report, whatever the case. Because if the Mossad really wanted clear picture, it'd be the people underneath the towers, right? It'd be the people taking the perfect shots, not some kids on the Doric apartments where they're not even the best place to see, as you said. So the dancing Israelis also were not literally dancing, right? They were high fiving. Some of their pictures are disturbing, right? One of them is holding a
Mm.
lighter to the towers. One of them is pointing at it. It's not what an ally would be doing. Why do you think they were doing that? Like psychological, were they just like maybe they're excited that America is going to help fight the Middle East, or they were just like anti-American? And also, there was a file apparently. I remember Ryan showing it that one of them said, "Give us 20 years and we'll take over your country." Is that an actual file that they said that? Like, we'll take over your
Okay.
media, that
Yeah, I
that whole
can.
thing. So just answer those questions because those I'm curious about those.
So you want me to do what he said, the 20 years first? So
Do that one
that
first because
was,
that's a big one.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there was another employee of Urban Moving Systems who was interviewed by the FBI, and I believe in the file he had come to the FBI actively, volunteered and come forward to them and said, "Well, there's another employee at an Israeli employee at Urban Moving Systems." He said he didn't say that it was one of the five dancing Israeli suspects, and he had said to him that basically Israel, within 20 years we're going to have you wrapped around our finger, or so, that type of quote. So that
Yeah,
it's
give us
accurate
20
that,
years. We're going to control your media and everything else. I mean, that's what he
right. So
said.
this was, so you can take that for what it's worth. This was a different employee. Was it a disgruntled employee? Was it an employee who had a grudge against that person that he quoted? Was it an employee who had been scammed by Urban Moving Systems, that they hadn't paid him or whatever? The bottom line is that we don't know who the person is that he was quoting. So,
But it's not the
you know,
dancing Israelis, right? It's
we,
not
I
the.
mean, it could have been one of them, but there's no, it doesn't even name who the person was. It doesn't even have a name redacted. So, and it could be that they knew that the person they were talking to. Imagine if you're working at a company and you don't know everybody. Maybe you know the immediate circle of people around you, but you know where certain people are from based on what language they're speaking or who they're hanging out with. It could be any of those things, and that's the problem, that everything that people mention about this is in the realm of could have been, right? Could have been that they planted a passport in Pennsylvania. Could have been that they handed off a camcorder to Dominic Suter before he fled the country. And I get it. There's a lot of things that could have happened, but we, so once you put a list of all the things that could have been on the blackboard, and then you ask, how would we find out if any of those things are true? I have no clue. So how do you find out who that person is that he was quoting?
Right. I have the
It,
document right in front of me. It says
yeah.
the former employee stated that an Israeli employee of Urban had even once remarked, "Give us 20 years and we'll take over your media and your country and destroy your country." So a
Hmm.
former employee stated that an Israeli employee, so he's not an Israeli employee, it seems.
Right.
This former employee could be anybody who said that one of these Israeli employees said that to him. So, I mean, that's what that says there. So this is hearsay, basically, right? We don't have any, you know, what could we do
Yeah,
with this?
I don't even know if they found like, let's say the
Well, there's
FBI
nobody's named.
followed
Is
up.
literally
Yeah,
nobody's named, it seems. Right.
right. So there are areas where maybe, if you're somebody in the chat, you don't believe what I'm saying, you don't believe the FBI. I would agree with you. Maybe the FBI could have followed up on that a little deeper, right? Maybe we could have had a little bit more detail, but after 9/11, there's considerations like what resources did they have to follow up on every single lead. Was this a greater lead than all the other foreign nationals that were arrested from 9/11, from Pakistan, from Africa, from other third countries? That's one of the issues that people don't consider. Okay, so you have all that evidence, and if you're a person in a decision making role at an investigative agency, what priority do you put on the dancing Israelis as opposed to the Zacharias Moussaoui case, or other people that were, there were Arab Americans that were arrested for suspicious behavior after 9/11, or not suspicious behavior, but they were suspicious because they were Arab Americans or Arab nationals living in Israel. And so that's one of the principles I want to bring here, Lucas. It's that when examining this, I mean, we all have um personal opinions and prejudices and everything, but if you have to address it in a clinical manner. There were, even if you hate Arabs, there were Arabs who were rounded up after 9/11 who had nothing to do with 9/11, and there were suspects of other countries, who were not Arab or not Muslim, who were also suspected and were rolled up after 9/11. So, instead of wondering, what is it that is here that is not being said, you have to consider it within the context of 9/11 was obviously the biggest national security failure in American history. And you know these people were, their lives, the dancing Israelis. So their entire identity forever will be framed within their idiotic behavior on 9/11, because people know that they were suspicious, and they said stuff that was obviously going to make them more suspicious, like that your real enemies are Palestinians, right?
Right, right, right.
Yeah, and so, as a police officer, maybe you're more suspicious of them because of the way they're behaving. As somebody who, maybe you're interacting with them, maybe you're looking out your window and you're seeing them behave um, suspiciously. And I know part of your question was,
Well, the
why would they
lighters
behave?
and the pointing and like,
Yeah,
an ally doesn't really act like, now these guys are just IDF or whatever
cor-
they were, but
correct.
did they
So
ever explain why they acted like this? Like to the
No,
light.
I don't think that, because when you behave this way, there's no adequate explanation where people, well, it's basically like, you've been caught just behaving, in a very foolish manner that would be both, whether it's suspicious or not, it's totally inappropriate, right? Um, so the explanation I would give, based on my interactions with people from Israel, is that there is a certain gallows humor. You have to remember that in the year 2000, like the year 2001, and the previous year 2000, there were suicide bombings on a fairly regular, not regular as in, oh, tomorrow there's going to be a bombing, but people, it was no longer really news, right? I mean, it was news because people were losing their loved ones, and it was news because you would be more cautious when you're going in certain areas, but it wasn't like a bomb blowing up on a bus over there was basically routine. And until 2002, the response was fairly restrained, if I could put it that way. Obviously the Israeli military was responding, but until Passover of 2002, when there was a massive bombing at Passover Seder in Netanya, the Park Hotel bombing, a lot of Israelis were basically venting about how this can't go on, and this is basically so. A lot of people had adopted this attitude that terror is a part of life, and a lot of black humor came out of it. So
Well,
that
it's
would
like
be
that,
my.
that one girl who was interviewed on the street. She's like, "Well, now you guys could know, but we're," and it sounds like a psychopath, but with that
Mhm.
mentality, she's like, "Well, now you guys see what we're going through." And that
Right.
and people think she's somehow, you know, involved or has this psychopath mentality, but what you're saying is this is coming from a people that is it's regular for terrorism, right? Rockets and explosions and bombs and suicide bombers where we don't have that here, and she's saying, "Well, now you guys will understand." But that is like, oh, see, that's proof that they did this on purpose or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. So and then when you're talking about why are they called the dancing Israelis, maybe you've heard this, but there's certainly probably people in the audience that don't know it. So in the wake of 9/11, as they started to figure out who the hijackers were, and their names were released to the public, so there was an interview team that went to Egypt, and they interviewed Mohammed Atta's dad, also named Mohammed. Um, and he said, why are you coming here? My son is innocent. Why aren't you talking about those dancing Israelis? Because in the Arab world, once there was a news report regarding the possibility that there was Israeli involvement, some of which, by the way, were Jewish newspapers, like the Forward, which is one of the Jewish Forward, the Mark Perlman article. Actually, somebody shared it underneath your post today. Um, Very well cited. Why? Because people are like, well, look, even Jews are talking about this Jewish Israeli connection to 9/11. So in the Arab world, they grasped upon it very quickly, and they said, well, there's not really, um, you know, a way that one of us could do it. It's not something a true Muslim would do. There's even a lot of attitudes in the Arab world where they say, well, we know our own people, um they're not really up to it in terms of the ability to plan. There's a self-esteem issue in the Middle East, where a lot of them don't believe that Arabs and Muslims are sophisticated enough to do this, and there's people in the West, in a coincidental manner, that also feel the same way about Arab and Muslim um, societies, where they're like, well, these are basically, I call it the Tuscan Raider complex, because George Lucas did pattern the in Star Wars the Tuscan Raiders on on the Arab Bedouin, so these nomadic herders and everything, and they're just grunting and stuff like that. But it's a misconception, and it's an issue of cultural perceptions, where you see Arab and Muslim societies as being primitive, okay, and there's certainly issues. Both of us, I think, would criticize, broadly speaking, certain things we observe in Arab and Muslim societies, and yet there are there's a lot of very educated people in those countries. And my experience in college, I went to a college that um, at least a third of the people in my department, it was an engineering department, were from the Middle East, from countries like Lebanon and Egypt, and some of them, by the way, still friends of mine. Didn't really, not political people, and very intelligent. Some of my professors, the head of my department was Egyptian. My differential equations teacher was Syrian, Muslim. The head of our plant, like the physical plant at my college, was a Palestinian from Gaza. So the person running the boilers and stuff like that. And some people might be recoiling in the chat because they're, oh, like what about, no, there's a lot of people in the Middle East who are sophisticated. So it's definitely something an Arab could do. But Muhammad Atta's father, because of the self perception among many people in the Middle East of their own society as being inferior to the West because of our, um, the wealth of the West, the technological advancement of the West, they don't necessarily believe that a Muslim could have done 9/11, and some of them don't believe that a Muslim would be immoral enough to have done it. So that was the quote. He said, "What about the dancing Israelis?" And then that was associated with the actual incident.
I mean,
Um,
the idea that this was so sophisticated, right? I mean, it's like the Charlie Kirk assassination. When I heard the first shot, I heard whoosh. I heard it. Everyone turned to the right. It was shot from the roof. You could hear it's long distance. You hear it's a rifle. You hear the crack. And we saw that Charlie Kirk was hit in the throat. Now, I don't know of any marksman that goes for a throat shot. It's either a headshot or a chest shot, right? So this kid missed and shot him in the neck. That's what I thought happened, and that's probably what did happen. But we'll find out. No, but every hijacking I've ever heard of in my life, the hijackers wanted something, right? We want to go over here. We want this money. Blah blah blah. When did they ever say they're going to kill themselves and go into a building? I mean, this is a very simple attack, and these planes are fully fueled going 500 miles an hour into these towers. And by the way, the towers withstood the attacks. They did exactly what they were supposed to do with a plane that was much bigger. And they stood long enough to evacuate almost 99% of the people or something like this. So, I even think the attack was supposed to be knock the towers over and get like tens of thousands of people. That would be worse if they both were knocked over on their side. They would have fell in other buildings, killed people in the streets. But the towers were hit and they collapsed afterwards after an hour. But these attacks are not they're not like impossible. Once you take a hijacked plane, you could fly it into a building. You could fly it into the Pentagon. You could fly it, well, whatever happened to Shanksville. So it's not that complicated at all, actually. Doing something, breaking through the Pentagon and breaking into some room and taking documents, that's something else. That's like a spy thing. This is simple. It's so simple people can't accept it. Just like the Charlie Kirk assassination. Someone laid in the prone and shot this guy in the throat. It's so simple. It was not an impossible shot. It wasn't so far away, right? So the simplicity of 9/11, people can't believe it must be something worse. It must be something more complicated, but it really isn't. It's like one of these people, they take a truck and they run people over at the Christmas uh, parade in Germany or something, and they kill all these people. What's so hard about that, right? So what's so hard about hijack? Yeah, hijacking a plane is, obviously a risk, but once you have the plane hijacked, people don't want to tackle you, except that one guy who did in
mhm.
Shanksville. And it's not difficult to execute. The pilots, if they're still alive, if they do what you want, until you take over the plane, they're not expecting to go to the Twin Towers, right? So that's another thing that people don't think about. It's not that complicated, right? The hijacking is, but once you have the plane hijacked, you have a giant missile at your disposal.
Yeah, and there's also the factor that even if it's not a complicated, sophisticated thing to do, that we've had evidence that's been presented, from the intelligence agencies and from press reports examining Al Qaeda and how they prepped for the attacks, and even Al Jazeera interviewing Ramzi bin Al Shib, who was supposed to have been the fourth pilot before he couldn't get a visa, so they substituted the Saudi, um, what was his name, Hani Hanjour. There's a lot of self snitching that happened in terms of Al Qaeda itself, and so that there were capable people on it. What do I mean by capable people? Okay, so the person who planned the 1993 bombing, and there's actually other conspiracy theories. I don't know if we'll get them to them today, honestly, Lucas, because we've covered a lot of ground with dancing Israelis, but the guy who planned the 1993 bombing and designed the device and got away and was on the run for many years, Ramzi Youssef, was the person who conceived of the 9/11 attacks originally. Now his plan wasn't necessarily just to have jetliners. He wanted to load them with explosives. That would have been more complicated. But eventually, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the person who ended up planning it after Ramzi Youssef was arrested, he happened to be, by the way, Ramzi Youssef's uncle. So they were, they were both related, and they also were hooked up with the network that was crystallizing into Al Qaeda. So Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was taking inspiration from films that he saw regarding the possibility of flying a plane into the World Trade Center. So, so that we have a record of how they started to plan for the 9/11 attacks. The problem is that a lot of people just don't, they choose not to believe it, and that's their choice.
Well, there was a
Uh,
movie, right, about a plane going to the Twin Towers, correct? And they say that's Hollywood pre-programming us. And
Right.
then
Yeah. I have a whole chat. That's one of the funnest things that I did during obviously it's a morbid topic, but there's so many, and some of these are like really interesting. Like with The Simpsons, there
yeah, The
was like a
Simpsons.
frame. Yeah. And there was a Pakistan Airlines handbill or advertisement. There was also Supertramp album cover it's if you looked at it at a certain, I think you had to use a mirror or something, and it would show 9/11 and was the waitress on the backdrop of the World's Trade Center. There were a number of albums that came around. Now the one issue with that, so let me pump the brakes for a second. A lot of the predictive programming ideas did come between 1993 and 2001. So you could say, well, are they just reacting because they know that there was already a bombing there? But it is really interesting stuff, and it speaks a little bit. Now there were other disasters or near disasters that happened at the World Trade Center too, including this massive fire in the 1970s. And so when you look at the whole picture, there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened, and yet, whether it's with regards to the dancing Israelis or directed energy, or it doesn't really support any particular theory. It just means, oh, maybe they knew it was coming or something, right?
Well, what about the idea that no one expected this to happen, but apparently the year before it happened, they did drills about planes hitting the towers. They also have the PNAC document, which is very suspicious. They're like, we just need another Pearl Harbor, and then all of a sudden
Hmm.
it happens a year later, and they call it a new Pearl Harbor and gives everything they want. I mean, this is the realm of the conspiracy that we could leave open, right? I mean, this is what I wanted the people to understand in this space. This space is not about here's the answers, no questions about 9/11. Don't question the passport that was found 2 blocks away with the guy's face. There's weird stuff about 9/11, right? There absolutely is to this day, and we're not even touching those. And people could think whatever they want, but I wanted to tackle the dancing Israelis because to me that was
Right.
the foreknowledge. And I just found it interesting when you debated Ryan that night. He didn't even care. He's like, "Well, I'm not really. That's not what all my arguments are hinged upon." I'm like, "Really?" He just let it go. He didn't even fight back. And I was like, what? This is the number one thing for foreknowledge. What are you talking about? And then I read about how the Israelis warned us in August, actually, of an attack. But they did not specify what the attack would be, or was it ignored? I mean, they didn't know exactly what was going to happen. What's the August the warning they gave us in August? What was that? If did they even explain it to us or
Yeah, so the most detail I've heard is that they did have the names of four people who became hijackers, including Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, but they weren't the only people. By the way, the CIA already knew that those two guys specifically were in the country a long time before 9/11. So the you know whether or not you care if the Mossad warned the United States, the CIA knew that these people were in the United States long before that warning came. Those two guys, and there were. I think they also mentioned Atta and Marwan Al Shehi was the guy who was the basically like his Huckleberry. Um, and then those are the four that are the names that are mentioned, and then there's even reports that they sent them 19 names, whether it's the same 19 or not. You know, is this covering their ass? I mean, that's the thing I asked, right? Is it like, oh, we did warn you or whatever? The issue that I have is, um, you know who did have forewarning, regardless of whether Israel or Russia or France warned the United States. The United States had warning because our intelligence agencies were listening in on Al Qaeda communications, including from the safe house in Yemen. They were listening in on a meeting, including people that were planners of the attacks, and Nawaf al Hazmi and the other guy was Nawaf al Hazmi and Khalid al Madar. So those two guys were at a meeting in Malaysia that the CIA and the Malaysian intelligence service was surveilling, and they actually had good details on it, and they didn't pass it on to America's domestic intelligence agencies like the FBI or customs. So those people were allowed back into the United States, and in fact, two of them, Midar and Hazmi, were even listed in the phone book in L.A., I believe. Um, so there was yes, there were indications that, according to the press at least, that Israel warned the United States, but other countries also warned the United States, and our own intelligence agencies had indications, and there were people in the FBI who were begging for more information and who were not granted that information, and so I'm I think that we have to we have to hold our own system accountable too, and you can also scrutinize. Like, is it easier to scrutinize a foreign government that's not it's not really accountable to you? I know people hate Israel, but they don't vote in Israeli elections, and they also don't know the language, and they have no conceivable hope of actually affecting change in Israel. So they have to hold their own government accountable. I'm actually surprised. I mean, maybe you'll agree with me here. There's been a ton of talk about the Epstein files, and there should be, but I haven't really seen um, much movement as far as the declassification on 9/11 either. And I think a lot of those issues would benefit, for everyone involved, meaning the general public, from having those documents more widely available. So there was an executive order to declassify them. I haven't really heard much about it.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I don't think we're ever going to get anything from there. I mean, there's probably too many high-ranking people in government, and power. Like Prince Andrew was one of them, right? Well, who else was involved with
mhm.
Epstein? And that's a whole nother conversation, Epstein himself. But so just
Well,
to
what I'm
go ahead.
saying is that along with the Epstein files, they were saying they were going to declassify a lot of the 9/11 files and a lot of the other, and obviously they did declassify a lot of stuff regarding JFK. They did that, and by the way, a lot of the stuff they declassified was basically like just new, like forwarded memos that had already been declassified previously, so they had to be declassified in their own right. So you're like, oh, I already seen this like 30 years ago, right? So a lot of it was a much ado about nothing, but I haven't really heard much, and maybe like in the future, we'll get some of it, but about any of the declassification of 9/11 stuff that Donald Trump was supposed to have done, and it could pertain to what we're talking about, like the dancing Israelis. It could pertain also to other things that might have been known by the United States prior to it. And by the way, so if I can just put forward my own theories on how the foreknowledge might have happened, um, of Israel. So there were other uh, avenues that they could have found out that were mentioned by Carl Cameron in the Fox News report, such as the relationship of Comverse, which was an Israeli managed company, with our telecommunications industry. There was another company that was also mentioned in those reports. I believe it was, I think it was like IDB or something. But there were two avenues that they could have found out through their involvement in the telecommunications industry, right? So this is certainly like if you're one of these people that, oh, Israel knew, they, why didn't they tell us? Well, maybe they were bugging people's phones and didn't let the FBI and CIA know what they knew from this surveillance that Americans did not know about, right? And mostly they feature those reports, but they don't really drill beyond it. And that's the big problem with the whole 9/11 truth movement is that they find these great tidbits, and then they're like, well, this is the evidence. It's not the evidence. That's an indicator, and you have to pursue that, right? But they haven't. So really, they're just expecting you to refute a case that they haven't made.
Yeah, and again, you like going back to the dancing Israelis, yeah, weird behavior, no explanation for it. Could be excitement that we're going to join the Middle Eastern Front or whatever the case. But ultimately, it's a nothing burger, it seems to me, right? Because if they weren't there before the attacks and there's no residue coming back from these tests, then what the hell were they really like? What's the big deal with these people? Right now, there were like 60 Israelis arrested, right? Like the following weeks, there was. You want to
Mhm.
get into the art students? We can go into
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But yeah, so there was, I think actually 200 Israelis at one point. I think it was 60 in like the month, and then 200 total, and then these art students, right? So go ahead into that if you want.
Okay, so in the dragnets that happened after 9/11, really the most interesting one was the dancing Israelis. Like there were press reports of some of these mall, like
The kiosks, right?
yeah, the
Yeah.
kiosks that they were selling these dumb toys, like these novelties, like the Zoom copter. And so that's it. Like what's the story here? Well, foreign nationals suspicious, they're speaking a Middle Eastern language, probably got reported by somebody because they were suspicious. And by the way, a lot of Israelis do look um like they're Arab. So like for example, my mother was Iraqi, so I look a little bit like my brother looks a lot like he'd probably punch me in the face, but my brother looks certainly Iraqi because he has darker eyes. But so many Israelis could be mistaken for Arabs, and many, ethnically, if you think about it, are uh, pretty close to the Arabs because there were many who came from nations like Morocco or Yemen or Iraq. So I don't find that to be terribly interesting. There was another group of people that were suspicious. I think they were arrested in the Philadelphia area. And the interesting thing about those guys was that there was camera footage found on them of the Sears Tower, right? But it's possible that that belonged to the customer, not to the movers. They were, I think, arrested because they were illegally dumping. Uh, so, you know, um, so these are real master criminals here. Um, so the art students is a different matter. The art students unfolded in the spring of 2001, and these were people who were hawking these paintings door to door in all sorts of different locations in the southeast, and maybe I think there was some in New Jersey. So the it coincides a little bit if you think about it. Florida, New Jersey were hotspots for hijackers. Certainly Patterson, New Jersey, which is not the art students were not in Patterson, New Jersey. But if you're in the New Jersey area, especially North Jersey, you could easily be driving through Hudson or Bergen County and get drive through Patterson or something. So some of those people were arrested. The art students were arrested in New Jersey and deported because they were suspiciously hawking paintings door to door. So what's the connection? Okay, well, the only connection is location. There's no correlation because generally speaking, they were rolled up before hijackers arrived in their area, or and there's also no real co-location because there's no actual account of them being in the known vicinity of a hijacker. Obviously, we can't know 100% that none of the hijackers were around when these people were arrested by I think it was customs. So, they were all working here illegally under tourist visas. And in many cases, they were detected because they were foolish enough to try to sell their paintings in federal buildings, and they didn't have um, credentials to have access to those buildings. So it looked like they were spying on those agencies, including the DEA and the Federal Protection Service. So again, like it's suspicious activity. It's certainly activity that based on the fact that they were identified and deported, and many of them were, the law enforcement that detained them, and they were generally willing to be interviewed by them. Like none of them, by the way, just like with the dancing Israelis, I didn't mention this. I mean, what do you? I mean, I don't know if you've been arrested, Lucas, in your life, but you don't
No,
have to have been arrested. What's the first thing generally people either hear from the police or assert to the police?
well, you have the right to remain silent, and you're not going to say anything,
Right. So
or they're innocent.
in none of the accounts I've read, whether it's in the press or any of the files, whether it's the DEA file or the Shea memorandum that's based on the DEA file of the art students, or in the Dancing Israelis file, none of these people asserts the right to an attorney, the Miranda rights, and none of them takes the right to remain silent, except in on particular matters, such as there was one person who apparently served in special forces and refused to answer polygraph questions regarding his service. And that's an understandable reason, right? But it's still like there were other things that disclosed to the police, to the FBI, sorry, uh, um, the dancing Israelis suspect. But with the art students, generally these were people who, if you're, again, like if you're thinking about this from a straightforward logical perspective, if you're trying to spy on the DEA, people who presumably are used to trying to fool people with false transactions as part of their job, and you basically walk in their door and you have a painting and you say, "Oh, this is with a foreign accent." You're like, "Oh, this is a painting that I drew. I'm an art student from the Bezalel Institute of Art, which is a real art school in Jerusalem. Are you interested in buying it?" That's not a great cover story, right? It discloses where you come from, and it's really like, I think it just shows the reductive thinking of people who continue to hold on to it, because it's the job of the DA, even if these people are not guilty, to investigate it, because it happened on their premises, and these are people here illegally, and they by the way, they could be drug traffickers. They also could be drug users, right? So that was the whole ecstasy period, right? A lot of these people are partiers. They're going around the world, going to raves. So there's plenty of reasons, and this was before 9/11. Remember, March and April of 2001, in Dallas Fort Worth area, Hollywood, Florida. Um, Most of these people were rolled up in places like that, but also in places like Oklahoma and Missouri, that there is no surface level connection to 9/11. Honestly, um, so these people are all arrested for illegally peddling wares in the United States, and they're deported. And later, in May of 2001, two people show up in Hollywood, Florida, named Marwan al-Shahi and Mohammed Atta, who had previously been living on the west coast of Florida, where they'd gone to flight school. So they moved to Hollywood, Florida, and they rent an apartment close to where some of the art students had been renting an apartment, on the same street. And then out comes, after 9/11, a story called Door to Door with Mohammed Atta in Der Zeit magazine in Germany, where basically they're like, oh, there were these teams that were following there were teams that were following the hijackers. They were from Israel, and they lived very close to them. And this was based, of course, on some anonymous sources from intelligence agencies. And so people misconstrued it to mean that they were literally living. In fact, Ryan Dawson actually said, I think to Adam Green, he said literally that Yaron Shmuel, one of the dancing Israelis, not one of the art students, was
That he
living next
drove
door to.
them, right? I remember that. He said he drove them.
Not that he drove them, but that he was living next door to
Uh-huh. Yeah,
uh,
something, yeah.
hijackers. And the reality is that Yaron Shmuel, apparently there's some place where it was found out that he had a Florida address, but the Florida address wasn't in Hollywood, Florida. Hollywood, Florida is in Broward County. He had an address in Miami Beach, which is in Dade County. Um, and that's where some of these so some of these obviously, I think some people can make mistakes and they mix up details, but I do think that there are cases where you have deliberate disinformation, or attempting to basically splice together two stories in order to make the narrative make sense. And that's one of them, that Yaron Shmuel, according to him, lived next door to hijackers. That's something I confronted him on that debate, and he didn't have the goods at the time because they don't exist.
Yeah, I mean that debate was I was shocked the way he handled that debate. I mean, again, because I've always considered him on point. I never questioned him because I never really questioned 9/11 anymore. I just said, well, they did it somehow anyway, and I moved on my life, right? And then I run into this and Whittemer's uh, article, and it's just, wait a minute. Dawson claimed these two guys were arrested for bombs in 2004, and those guys had nothing to do. They're not even. They got pulled up for speeding or some other thing, and that's what I started thinking. Wow, this is really bad. So there's people just make these claims without proving it. Like another friend of mine sent me a screenshot of well, according to this U.S. official in this report, this guy claimed that. Well, there's no U.S. official name, there's no report name, there's never a reference to a lot of these claims. And so, how are you going to check that? You just take it, at face value, and people do that because they trust each other. I mean, when I was in the movement, people trusted me. If I said something, they just, oh yeah, Lucas, he's always honest. But what if I'm wrong? And that's why we have to always fact check. So we've been going for like an hour, almost 2 hours. We got about 9 minute mark. Well, 9 minutes from now will be 2 hours. I don't know if we want to wrap this up soon, or you have anything else you want to add. I see here sprinkler theory. I don't know if you want to get into that. I was looking at, because I'm looking at our itinerary here that you wrote down. I mean, I think we pretty much covered the Dancing Israelis completely, and we got into other things.
Well, now that you mentioned an itinerary, people are like, "Wow, did they script it?" But no,
no, I
there's
wanted
so
to. I
much.
wanted to do
There's
this in
so,
order, but
yeah, I
this
know, but
was
so many people don't understand how many things there are to how many different strands are on these, and so I was obviously I wanted to prepare in case. I didn't know whether we would do a Q&A when then we're not doing it, but I think one day I'd like to do it, even if it's on a different program or something, so people who believe in this can come and confront me, just
right.
like you're saying, if, and maybe you'd like to do it yourself on other topics one day. I know that there's a lot of hostility out there towards you, but I think there's what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do here isn't to tell people stop caring about 9/11, okay? Because I care, right? So I care because it was definitely uh, a milestone occasion. That the way that I looked at the country was totally different after 9/11, and then obviously the deceptions of our government afterward regarding the war in Iraq, it squandered a lot of the lessons and perhaps the things we could have gleaned from. Obviously that's a tragedy, but we'd like to use the tragedy in order to get better. Well, it didn't happen. um, so the sprinkler system, I'm glad, so I was going to mention it, so I'm glad you also reminded me. So there's another threat. It's not very common to hear it, and Ryan Dawson isn't the only person to talk about it, but it concerns maybe the sabotage, not the controlled demolition of the World Trade Center, but the sabotage of the sprinkler system. And so There were 5 men arrested in 2002 in Memphis, and they had been contracted by Denko Mechanical, which was a contractor in New York, and they were apparently uh, they had had access to the World Trade Center, perhaps through um, you know illegitimate means, as maybe like some sort of kickback. Um, and so they were arrested, and they had fake IDs from Tennessee, and somebody who issued it to them, apparently she took a bribe, and she died under some mysterious circumstances later. But anyway, because 3 of them were residents of Jerusalem, and so they carried Israeli ID documents. um, Ryan Dawson has made the allegation that these were Mossad agents. Now, I'll read you their names. One of them was Khaled Odtala. The other one was another one, Sahara Hamid, Mohammed Faris, Mustafa Saeed Abu Shaheen, and Abdel Muhsen Mahmoud Hamad. Um, and so 3 of them held passports showing their residency in Jerusalem. Now, what people don't understand, okay, and this is getting into a political question, um, citizenship in Jerusalem is complicated. Okay, so West Jerusalem um, under Israeli internationally recognized sovereignty, and East Jerusalem is asserted to be under Israeli sovereignty. But the Arab residents of East Jerusalem, unless they choose to take upon themselves Israeli citizenship, are generally um, Palestinian citizens with Israeli ID cards, because they're Palestinians who have permanent residency in an Israeli city according to Israeli law. So you're following me?
Yes.
So these are they have Israeli travel documents. They might also have, by the way, Jordanian travel documents, because at one point they would have been Jordanian citizens. Um, and then there was another one who had an Egyptian passport, and another one who had a Venezuelan passport, which, by the way, Venezuela in Latin America is one of the largest Palestinian communities. But because 3 of them had Israeli identification, um, Ryan Dawson has asserted that this was part of some sabotage plot by the Mossad against the World Trade Center. Yes, there could be Arab Israelis or Palestinians who work for the Mossad. There could be, but there's no evidence that these people were. And the big fallacy of this is that whatever. So the planes collide with the World Trade Center. Like if the sprinkler system turns on, what does that do? You already have pressure loss. It's basically like, somebody, like, imagine somebody who's bleeding out completely. So it's not going to do anything. It can't get the pressure even up to the top floors, and probably is leaking out lower than that. So there is no conceivable way that when you poke a 40-foot hole in a building that's and there's this massive fire and all this wreckage, um the sprinkler system is not going to do anything.
Right.
Structural damage and all that. So that's one of the other things where um people like him, and there are other people out there. We could talk about all of the stuff that Christopher Berlin said in the past, um and all these other people like Judy Wood, and there's Rebecca Roth, and by the way, Ryan Dawson criticizes some of them, and I'll be fair to him. The things he's said in recent years are more rational than things he said 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because he probably realized that it just doesn't make sense um, to himself, right? So um, there is some process of grasping that in some of these things he's just hurting his case, right? When you make assertions like that. But it's important, like he included some of these things on that film, on what's it called? Not By Way of Deception. It's Empire
Empire Mask.
Unmasked.
Yeah.
Empire Unmasked. So some of the, in fact, I think he did include the sprinkler story on it. So these are issues that they come up every once in a while, and especially next month is the anniversary of 9/11, and I do know that every year, close to the anniversary, these issues come up, and I'm willing to be available, right? Not on command, I'm not a genie here, but if people want to come and challenge the arguments I'm making, I'm fully available. Just like I'm sure that tomorrow you'll say something, Lucas. I'll probably find, maybe, we're not here because you and I are like 100% simpatico, right? There's going to be differences of opinion on 9/11. There's going to be differences of opinion on other topics you cover, but it is important really to have open and fair debate, and I'm willing to do that with people that want to assert that the dancing Israelis were spies, that the art students were surveilling hijackers, that the Israel did 9/11. There's people who say that Bernard Kerik was in hoc to the Mossad through the Wertheimer family, and some loan that they gave him. All those different things. I'm willing to. I'm not guaranteeing I'm going to have an answer. By the way, and by the way, if people come away and they say, I still believe this, and you completely have discredited yourself. I'm not here to just put myself as the authority on everything 9/11, but there's very, very strong reluctance to address this on the skeptical side, because people don't want to take it seriously, but it is being taken seriously because after 25 years, there's a whole generation that wasn't born on 9/11. In fact, by this time, almost two generations, because um, people who are 18 now, they were born, what is it, in 2006. So there's certainly going to be more skepticism going forward, and I want to be a voice of this position of reason, and actually showing evidence, and working through what are the elements of guilt. Like if you see suspicious behavior, does that mean that that person is indeed guilty, or do you have to sustain that suspicion through evidence?
Right. I'm an evidence guy. So for me, I need more than just hearsay. And honestly, over the years, when I became so anti-Semitic, I just assumed Jews are lying all the time. That's just literally, I'm being honest. That's what I did, and that's why lately I've been talking to so many people in the background, just getting different angles and perspectives. And it's just when you don't let the other side talk and you assume they're evil automatically, that nothing they say is going to come forward and convince you because you already made a decision. But I do want to wrap this up. I mean, we went through a lot. We were kind of back and forth. There's so much details to this. And unfortunately, as you can see, my account is completely deboosted. I mean, there's only a dozen people in here, a couple dozen people, not much as I used to have the reach, as you can see. That's what happened to someone like me. I used to have a very, very influential account, but now it is what it is. But I did want to keep my word to you. I did say we would do this, and I would give you this platform. I thought it'd be more people, but it is what it is. But it is recorded, so people could come back and listen to what you had to say. Again, it was a lot of information, and if I ever get a platform back somehow, and I'm able to, really help, I could do it again. But do you anything you want to wrap up? Anyway, any place you want to send people to, your Substack or this book you're working on before we let you go?
Yeah, so my Substack is basically, it's called Jaffa Wire, but it is at um razorsharpnews.substack.com. And so I do have a lot of articles on this, not just this topic, and also, so I did other refutations of Ryan Dawson on the Tate brothers and on Epstein. I've done refutations on Ian Carroll, and all sorts of other. I mean, basically, like, you could pick anything that guy says, um, and you'd have ample material. I've also done a series of articles on Tucker Carlson's documentary on 9/11, which I would argue is just as misleading as anything that Dawson has put out. Um, and yeah, I'd again, I'd like to thank you. And any, by the way, I think you've been fair, but I'd also say if somebody wants to host me and be a, and basically take the other side, and pursue my arguments and try to unpack, if somebody wants to have an actual debate, somebody wants to, challenge things that I've said to Lucas today. That's why I do this, because I think it is important. And, I want to persuade people, but I don't want to persuade people through bullying them and, talking down to their, prejudices. And, people get into these headspaces where they believe things, uh, you know, I don't know if you know the author Nassim Nicholas Taleb, but he's become pretty unhinged, but he's known to be a very intelligent person. So this
Mhm.
isn't an issue of people being dumb, right? And believing, there are dumb people who believe in conspiracy theories, and there are intelligent people who believe in conspiracy theories, and everything in between. And the reason I think that they proliferate is in part because of the censorship of some of the people that put them forward, and also, just speech policing in general, like that, like it's been done to people like you. So yeah, I'll always, by the way, unconditionally, I stand by the free speech of anyone, so long as they're not advocating for harming other people or scamming people, other illegal stuff. um, but that's it for me.
All right, Ray. Well, listen, I appreciate it. I really appreciate you, educating us on several things. Again, people, whatever he said, don't take his word for it. Go check. The FOIA requests are all out there. You can double check what he said. And I really appreciate you guys coming. The people who saw the space. I wish it was bigger, but I did what I could, Ray. But that's it for tonight, guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to each other later. Take care, everyone. Bye bye now.
Good night.
Good night.